So here we're looking at rationalizing denominators. So in grade 11, this is something that we worried about, but in grade 12, we're not going to actually worry about rationalizing the denominators so much, but it is important to understand the process of how we do it. Okay, so first of all, we won't be doing this. Okay, we won't be squaring this and squaring this to get rid of denominators, because when we square a fraction, we change the value of the fraction. So to get rid of the square root, we're going to multiply the bottom by the square root. Okay, and square root times square root 2 is equal to 2. Now, in any ratio, we can't multiply the bottom of a ratio because we change the value of the ratio. But if we multiply the top and bottom of the ratio by the same amount, we're going to keep that ratio the same. And so we end up with this expression. Okay, so we still end up with a square root in the numerator, but that's the whole idea. It doesn't matter if we have the square root in the numerator, we've gotten rid of the square root in the denominator. But, for the most part in grade 12, we're going to just leave it like that. Okay? But this process of doing this is very important. In fact, this one, especially dealing with these binomial denominators, is very important because you need to know how to deal with these binomial denominators. So to get rid of a binomial denominator like this, I need to multiply by something called the conjugate. Okay? So if it's 1 plus root 2, we use the minus root 2 form. And when we do that, if I multiply this, I FOIL it out, I get 1 times 1. 1 times negative square root 2 is minus root 2. 1 times positive root 2 is plus root 2. Root 2 times negative root 2 is going to be negative, and root 2 times root 2 is 2. So what always happens is these square root parts always cancel out. They end up being 0 pairs. Okay, so we get rid of those parts, and all we're left with is rational terms in the denominator, and that's what we really wanted to do. Okay, but again, just like with any other fraction, if we multiply the bottom of this fraction by some number, we have to multiply the top by the exact same to keep the ratio the same. So I end up with 2 minus 2 root 2. On top, I've got to simplify that. 1 minus 2 is negative 1, so I'm going to change that from 2 minus root 2 root 2 to positive 2 root 2 minus 2. Okay, so dividing by negative 1, we'll switch that subtraction around. So this one here, same thing. We want to get rid of that binomial radical. So we're going to multiply by the conjugate. So the conjugate is 3 minus root 2. Okay, and this is going to be 3 minus root 2 on top. So when we multiply out the bottom, we're going to end up with 3 times 3 is 9. We're not going to worry about the two middle parts because we know they're always going to cancel out. It's going to be minus root 2 times root 2, which is 2. So we always get rid of that square root because we end up with square minus square. And this only works for square roots, not for cube roots. We have to multiply out the top, so we get 6. Root 2 times 2 is negative 2 root 2. 3 times negative root 3 is negative 3 root 3. And then negative root 2 times negative root 3 is positive root 6. Okay, so then I have to still simplify this, and I'm going to end up with, there's no like terms on the top, so I end up with 6 minus 2 root 2 minus 3 root 3 plus root 6, and on the bottom, it's all divided by 7. Okay, so there's rationalizing the denominator, and again, we don't really need to worry about rationalizing the denominator so much, but this algebraic process of using a conjugate is actually a really important concept, and that's something that's going to show up again, so we need to remember that one. Okay, but otherwise, if I see 3 over root 2, if you choose to rationalize it, no problem, that's no big deal, but if you want to just leave it as 3 over root 2, that's perfectly fine in grade 12 math.